Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I'm putting on my economic historian hat today because we're tackling a topic of massive global importance. We are looking at the deep systemic roots of poverty in India. When you look at an economy as vast and dynamic as India's, it's so easy to just see the surface-level symptoms of poverty. But to truly understand why such a massive portion of the population struggles, we've got to look backward. We have to look structurally. So we're going to break down the 7 primary causes of poverty in India step by step to see exactly how historical exploitation, economic stagnation, and social structures have all intertwined over the years.
Okay, let's dive right into this. You'll notice pretty quickly that these 7 causes, they form a really complex web. It's not just some random list of isolated problems. You've got colonial rule sitting right alongside modern unemployment and fast population growth. And as an economic historian, the main thing I want you to take away is that these issues absolutely do not exist in a vacuum. Every single one feeds into the other, right? You literally cannot understand the backwardness of agriculture without understanding the illiteracy of the farmer, and there's no way to grasp the severe lack of capital without looking at the history of exploitation.
So, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the historical roots. Second, demographics and population growth. Third, illiteracy and unemployment. Fourth, inequalities of income. And finally, number 5, the vicious debt trap.
Let's start with Section 1, the historical roots.
You see, the foundation of mass poverty in India was actually laid over 2 centuries. For about 200 years, India was subjected to colonial rule, and this era was essentially defined by a policy of deliberate exploitation. Colonial rulers took what could have been a totally thriving region and turned it into a poor, backward economy. And guys, this wasn't an accident. It was a core feature of the system. That structural damage cast an incredibly long shadow. I mean, even long after independence, the GDP growth rate in India remained constantly low, right up until the 1980s. Just think about that massive historical hangover for a second. This incredibly long period of low economic output basically meant the nation was constantly struggling with the legacy of suppressed per capita income. It created this huge multi-generational hurdle for lifting people out of poverty.
And it's absolutely crucial to understand that the colonial rulers didn't just passively extract resources. No, they actively dismantled existing economic structures. They deliberately destroyed India's indigenous handicrafts industry. Now, before this happened, Indian textiles and crafts were globally renowned. They were famous. So by intentionally dismantling this sector, they caused absolute mass unemployment for a huge number of weavers and skilled craftsmen. Practically overnight, people with completely viable trades were stripped of their livelihoods. It pushed a massive wave of the population straight into poverty.
All of that destruction leads us directly to the sluggish pre-1980s economy. Why did growth stay so low for so many decades? Well, it's because the basic capacity for production was fundamentally suppressed. The country was suffering from a severe underutilization of its natural resources, a sheer lack of modern technology, and totally stifled entrepreneurial ability. When you aren't utilizing your resources or your people's potential, your overall gross domestic product, basically your national pie, stays incredibly small. And when the national pie is that small, the slice that goes to the average citizen, the per capita income, remains desperately low. The nation just flat out couldn't generate the wealth needed to lift those masses out of poverty.
Moving on to Section 2, demographics and population growth.
Now, rapid population growth, especially among the poor, is a massive driver of poverty. But why exactly does this happen? Well, first off, there's often a widespread ignorance of birth control measures, or people just don't see the need for them. But it actually goes much deeper into basic economic survival. You see, many poor families consider a male child to be an earning asset, literally a source of income and absolutely crucial security for their old age. Because of this desperately needed security, families just go on unnecessarily expanding their size. But here is the cruel mathematical irony of the whole situation. By expanding their family to try and secure their future, they end up dividing already meager family resources. This substantially reduces the income per head, and it drags their overall standard of living even further down into poverty.
All right, Section 3, illiteracy and unemployment.
It's incredibly interesting and honestly tragic to see how illiteracy totally paralyzes economic mobility in 2 completely different environments. Look at the rural side. Because of illiteracy, Indian farmers and villages often fail to learn modern methods of cultivation. They can't read about or easily adopt new tools and implements. And the result? Their agricultural productivity falls and their income just plummets right along with it. Now contrast that with the urban poor. Illiterate migrants move to the cities, but they end up trapped as unskilled workers. They often find themselves living in slums, working for miserably low-paid salaries, simply because they lack the vocational training needed to negotiate better wages.
So whether you're in a rural or urban setting, illiteracy acts as this concrete ceiling on a person's potential.
And of course, that lack of skills feeds directly into a massive underemployment crisis. India has an absolute abundance of unskilled labor, as we just saw with the rapid population growth, but it also faces a severe lack of capital resources. This huge mismatch basically means that true, profitable employment is incredibly hard to find for the whole working population. So what you get instead is widespread unemployment and something called semi-employment. Semi-employment is this really tough economic state where people are doing whatever odd, fractional jobs they can find just to survive. But they aren't generating nearly enough income to actually escape poverty. The system just completely lacks the capital to put this huge workforce to productive, profitable use.
Let's look at Section 4, Inequalities of Income.
A huge underlying cause of all this poverty is the severe inequality in income, which is mostly driven by how unequally land and resources are distributed. After independence, there were definitely aims to redistribute land in rural areas, to kind of level the playing field. But here's what happened. In most Indian states, these vital land reforms simply weren't implemented properly by the state governments. But, and this is a really important but, there is a glimmer of actionable economics here. Look at the states of Kerala and West Bengal. They were the exceptions. They successfully implemented land reforms to redistribute land and actually tackle that inequality. So it proves that dedicated policy can absolutely make a profound difference. Unfortunately, though, across the vast majority of the country, that entrenched inequality kept resources concentrated at the top, leaving the masses destitute.
Finally, Section 5, the vicious debt trap. So aside from all the macroeconomic stuff we've talked about, there are these deeply personal reasons for poverty that force vulnerable people to navigate a crushing system every single day. First, there is this intense pressure to fulfill social obligations and perform religious ceremonies. This causes even the very poorest families to spend heavy amounts of money that they just don't have. Second, and honestly perhaps even more tragically, small farmers simply lack the cash to buy basic agricultural inputs. I'm talking about the bare necessities, seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, the things required literally just to grow their food. Because they have absolutely zero capital, they're forced to borrow from local moneylenders, and often at totally exorbitant interest rates. Predictably, they're unable to repay these loans, and they become victims of a chronic, inescapable cycle of indebtedness. They are borrowing money just to survive, sinking deeper and deeper into a trap with every single planting season.
When you lay the whole thing out like this, the sheer scale of the challenge is honestly breathtaking. From the deliberate destruction of ancient craft industries by colonial powers, all the way down to a modern farmer who is trapped by a moneylender just trying to buy seeds, it is a deeply, deeply interconnected web. You really can't fix the debt trap without fixing the illiteracy, and you can't fix the underemployment without addressing the unequal distribution of resources. Which leaves us with this final, really vital question. How can a developing nation actually untangle a web this complex? Understanding these 7 root causes is the absolutely required first step for any economic planner, historian, or citizen who is trying to grasp the true magnitude of poverty in India. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.